Most of us know the story of the Great Temple in Jerusalem, but what about the time before? It turns out there's this mysterious 57-year gap in the timeline, a kind of historical cold case. And the ancient sages? They cracked it like master detectives. It all comes down to one very specific number. Let's dig in. So you think about ancient Israel, and your minds probably goes straight to Solomon's magnificent temple, right? But what happened in the generations before that? I mean, after the central holy site at Shiloh was destroyed, but before the temple was even a blueprint, where did people go? Where was God's home on earth, so to speak? That's the huge question we're tackling. And the whole mystery, it really boils down to this one number, 57. Not around 50 or a couple of generations, 57 years. That's how long the ancient rabbinic texts say the sacred tabernacle was basically in limbo, housed in temporary locations. So how on earth did they land on such a specific number? And what did this weird in-between era actually mean for the people living through it? Okay, let's just lay it all out. We're talking about the 57-year mystery. Here's the deal. After Shiloh fell, the tabernacle, the portable sanctuary, ended up in two temporary spots, Nov and Gibeon, and the sages calculated this period lasted for, you guessed it, exactly 57 years. So we're going to be detectives here. First, we'll crack the math, and then we'll figure out the unique rules for this very unique time. All right, first up, cracking the timeline. Seriously, how do you reconstruct a timeline from thousands of years ago with that kind of precision? Well, the ancient sages didn't just guess. They put on their detective hats and started piecing together clues from all over the biblical texts to build a rock-solid chronology. So the whole investigation kicks off with a major historical event. There's this huge, disastrous battle, and the Ark of the Covenant itself gets captured by the Philistines. Now, when it's finally returned, it doesn't go back to the tabernacle where you'd expect. Instead, it ends up in this little town called Kiriath Jearim. And the text gives us our first solid number. It stayed there for 20 years. That 20-year period, that's our anchor for everything else. And this is where the detective work gets really impressive. The sages weren't just like, okay, 20 years, got it. No, they broke it down to prove it. They cross-referenced the reigns of different leaders, so you have 10 years when the prophet Samuel was in charge, then 1 year where he co-reigned with King Saul. After Samuel passes, Saul rules alone for 2 more years. And finally, you have the first 7 years of King David's reign from Hebron. You do the math, 10 plus 1 plus 2 plus 7, boom, it adds up perfectly to 20. Every single year is accounted for. Okay, so now that we have our 20-year anchor, we can build out the rest of the timeline. Let's do the final calculation. You start with those 20 years the ark was in Kiriath Jearim. Then you add the 33 years that King David reigned from his new capital, Jerusalem. That brings us to 53. And then the text tells us that his son, Solomon, started building the temple in the 4th year of his reign. So you add those 4 years, what do you get? 20 plus 33 plus 4 equals 57. Exactly. There it is. The mystery of the number is solved. So we've solved the when. But honestly, this next part is even more fascinating, the what. What was it actually like to live during this 57-year limbo? What were the religious rules? Because this was not a normal time, and as we're about to see, it didn't have normal laws either. And believe it or not, the key that unlocks the entire legal status of this period comes down to this one single verse. It's almost like a prophecy, predicting a time after the Israelites entered the land, but before they had a final permanent holy site. A time of transition, defined at what it wasn't yet. Now, when the sages read these words, rest and inheritance, they didn't just see poetry. No way. To them, these were precise legal terms. They were code words. They figured out that the rest was the code for Shiloh, the tabernacle's first long-term home. And the inheritance, that was the code for the ultimate destination, Jerusalem. So these aren't just place names. They're names for entire eras of history, each with its own set of rules. And this wasn't just some abstract idea. It had a huge real-world impact. See, when the sanctuary was in a permanent home like Shiloh or later, Jerusalem, you had to bring all your sacrifices to that one central spot. Building your own private altar was a big no-no, strictly forbidden. But during this 57-year gap, this time between the rest and the inheritance, that rule was basically put on hold. The logic was, since the main sanctuary itself was temporary, private acts of worship on temporary altars were permitted. But if you think the detective work is done, you are in for a surprise. The sages spotted another complication, another legal loose end that just didn't quite add up. And how they solved this one? Wow, it shows just how deep their logical system really went. So here's the next puzzle. There is a special agricultural offering called the second tithing that had to be brought to the central sanctuary and eaten there. So the question is, during those 57 years, did people have to bring their tithes to the temporary sites of Nov and Gibeon? The answer, it turns out, hinges on the one crucial thing that was missing from the tabernacle during that time: the Ark of the Covenant itself. To figure this out, the sages pull out a really sophisticated tool from their interpretive toolkit. It's called a gezerah shava, which is basically a verbal analogy. The idea is brilliant in its simplicity. If you find the exact same, often unique word used in two totally different parts of the Bible, it creates a legal link between them. It's like a hidden hyperlink telling you these two laws are connected, and you can use one to understand the other. And here's that tool in action. It all comes down to the Hebrew word sham, which means there. The verse about placing the ark in the holy place says, "You shall place it there." And what do you know? The verse about eating the second tithe says, "You shall eat it there." You see the connection? The sages saw that shared word and made a logical leap. Since the ark wasn't physically there during the 57 years, then the obligation to eat the second tithe there must also be suspended. The status of one determined the status of the other. Pretty clever, right? Okay, so just when you think everything is neatly tied up with a bow, the Talmud throws a curveball. It turns out there was a fundamental debate between two of the greatest sages about what our key verse actually meant. And this is so important because it shows that for them, the argument itself was a path to discovering truth. So the showdown is between two giants, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. And get this, they both agree that rest and inheritance are code for Shiloh and Jerusalem, but they completely reverse which is which. For Rabbi Yehuda, rest is Shiloh and inheritance is Jerusalem. For Rabbi Shimon, it's the exact opposite, a perfect mirror image. So how could they both be so sure of their case? Rabbi Yehuda comes in with his proof text. He quotes the prophet Jeremiah, who, lamenting the destruction of the temple, refers to Jerusalem as God's inheritance. For Rabbi Yehuda, that's game over. Case closed. The prophets themselves call Jerusalem the inheritance. But hold on, because Rabbi Shimon has an equally powerful proof. He quotes the book of Psalms, where God says about Zion, another name for Jerusalem, "This is my resting place forever." I mean, the text couldn't be more explicit. So now we've got this incredible situation where one prophet calls Jerusalem inheritance and a psalmist calls it a resting place. What do you do with that? This leads to a huge logical problem for Rabbi Shimon. We all know historically that Shiloh came first. So if he's right that Shiloh is the inheritance and Jerusalem is the rest, then that original verse from Deuteronomy seems backward. It says you haven't come to the rest and to the inheritance. Shouldn't it be the other way around? It's a major chronological challenge. And Rabbi Shimon's solution is just brilliant. He argues the verse isn't meant to be a timeline at all. It's a rhetorical device for emphasis. It's like saying, you haven't even reached the first bus stop, let alone the final destination. The verse is saying, obviously you haven't reached the final destination, Jerusalem, the rest, but you haven't even made it to the first major stop, Shiloh, the inheritance. The inverted order is meant to stress just how far they still had to go. So, after this incredible intellectual journey through chronology, law, and linguistic analysis, what have we really discovered? The answer isn't just about 57 years. It's about uncovering a whole way of thinking. What we've just seen is the Talmudic mind at work. It's a complete toolkit for thinking that includes meticulous textual scrutiny, where every single word matters, chronological reconstruction, which treats history like a puzzle you can actually solve, sharp legal interpretation, finding hidden codes in plain sight, and these incredible logical analogies to connect ideas across the entire text. And maybe most importantly, a deep respect for debate as the real path to truth. It really leaves you wondering, doesn't it? An entire world of history and law, all unpacked from just a handful of verses. It makes you ask, what other intricate puzzles, what other forgotten stories are still lying dormant in these ancient books, just waiting for the right questions to bring them back to life?